Most people think the Amish have the strictest bedroom rules on the planet. Separate sleeping for men and women, no electricity, plain beds, no decorations on the walls. And growing up the way I did, yeah, I used to think that too. But then I started learning about how people lived just 150 years ago in the Victorian era, and I want to tell you right now, those rules made our Amish ways look like a weekend vacation. We are talking about a world where married couples were forbidden to share a bed, where little children were forced to sleep in the freezing cold on purpose, and where a bride could walk into her wedding night with absolutely zero idea what was about to happen to her. I am not making any of this up. My name is Eliza, and I grew up in a traditional Amish community in Pennsylvania. I left that life behind a few years back, and since then I have spent a lot of time comparing the world I grew up in to the outside world, both now and in history. And what I found when I started reading about the Victorian era, the 1800s, all the way through the early 1900s, genuinely shocked me. So today I am going to walk you through 6 Victorian bedroom rules that would make even the strictest Amish bishop raise an eyebrow. Every single one of these is documented historical fact. The first one is this. Married couples were not allowed to share a bed, and in wealthy households they did not even share a bedroom. I know that sounds strange, but this was considered medically correct at the time. A British doctor named Benjamin Ward Richardson was one of the loudest voices pushing this idea in the late 1800s. He and other physicians believed that if two people slept in the same bed, the weaker sleeper would literally drain the physical vitality out of the stronger one. They called it the single bed system, and by 1892, the Yorkshire Herald confidently declared that twin beds would replace the double bed in every room shared by two people. By the 1920s, domestic manuals were saying that single beds were now the rule in most houses. For wealthy Victorians, separate rooms entirely were the standard. The two bedrooms were usually connected by a private hallway or door, so the husband could visit, but then go sleep in his own room. Growing up Amish, my parents shared a bed their whole married life. I never once heard anyone suggest that was a problem. The second rule involves the bedroom windows, and this one honestly sounds like something a person would do to punish someone, not help them. Victorian society was absolutely obsessed with what they called clean air. Before germ theory was proven by Louis Pasteur in the 1860s, people believed that disease came from bad smells and stagnant air. This was called the miasma theory. Because of this, bedroom windows were required to be left open all night, every night, no matter how cold it was outside. Not cracked open, open. The idea was to prevent a buildup of what they called carbonic acid in the room, which is what we now know as simply carbon dioxide from breathing. Women's magazines like Godey's Lady's Book from 1862 had entire articles on proper bedroom ventilation. But here is where it gets hard to believe. Children were made to sleep on bare mattresses with the windows permanently open, even in winter, with only their day clothes and each other for warmth. Parents were not doing this to be cruel. They genuinely believed that a warm, closed room would kill their children. Ruth Goodman, a historian who wrote a book called How to Be a Victorian, documented this directly. In my Amish community, we used quilts, shared warmth, and kept the cold out. I cannot imagine being told to leave the window open in a Pennsylvania January because it was the healthy thing to do. The third rule is about what happened to women on their wedding night, and I want to be respectful here, but the truth is important. Victorian women, especially those from middle and upper class families, were deliberately kept completely ignorant about what marriage physically meant. Their sexuality was described by the doctors and writers of the time as completely dormant, meaning it simply did not exist until a husband activated it. A woman was supposed to toss off her innocence the moment she was married, and somehow become everything her husband needed, all without ever having been told a single thing about it. One of the most famous pieces of advice a Victorian bride ever received came from Queen Victoria's mother, who reportedly told her daughters simply to lie back and think of England. That was the preparation. Lie back and think of England. Author Therese O'Neill, who wrote a book called Unmentionable about Victorian women's private lives, explained that the only books about these subjects had to be framed as hygiene or religion just to get into people's homes, because the topic was so completely forbidden. In Amish communities, we are modest and private, yes, but mothers talk to their daughters. There is preparation. There is community knowledge passed down quietly. The Victorian approach was not modesty. It was enforced ignorance. The fourth rule is about what you could and could not put on your bed during the day. Victorian bedroom etiquette was extremely specific. You could not sit on your made bed in the clothes you had been wearing outside. No street clothes on the bed. Full stop. Handbags were not allowed on the bed. Coats were absolutely forbidden. The reasoning was that city streets were filthy, covered in germs, horse waste, and every kind of bacteria, and doing laundry was a 2-day process involving hauling water, boiling clothes, scrubbing with lye, and hours of ironing. Once a servant made the bed in the morning, the gentry did not return to it until it was turned down again at night. They had special furniture just for resting during the day, called a chaise longue or fainting couch, specifically so they would not contaminate their bed linens. In our Amish homes, we kept things tidy and plain, but there was no formal rule about fainting couches. You sat where you sat. The fifth rule has to do with reading in bed, which was treated as a genuine threat to your life. And in fairness, it actually was. In the era of candles and oil lamps, reading in bed was one of the leading causes of house fires. Between 1833 and 1866, there were 2,969 fires recorded in London alone. A single candle knocked over in a bed full of linen and wool could kill a family in minutes. So reading in bed was not just discouraged, it was considered reckless and irresponsible, the kind of thing that respectable people simply did not do. Victorian households developed special match safe holders designed specifically for bedtime, little decorative cases where you would lock away the matches before sleeping so that no one could reach them in the dark. The rule was simple. You finished your reading in another room, you said your prayers, and you went to bed in the dark. In our Amish homes, we used oil lamps too, and we were careful, but I never heard of a strict household rule banning reading in bed entirely. The sixth rule, and the one that I think is the most fascinating when you compare it to Amish life, is about courtship. In the Victorian-Era, an unmarried man and woman were not permitted to be alone together. Not in a room, not on a walk, not anywhere without a chaperone present. Upper-class Victorian homes were even designed specifically to prevent unsupervised contact between men and women. Rooms were arranged and designated by gender. A gentleman could not simply sit alone with a young woman, even in her own family home, without another adult present. And this was enforced hard. Any young woman caught alone with a man risked her entire reputation, her future marriage prospects, and her family's social standing. Now here is the part that surprises most people when they hear it. In many Amish communities, particularly traditional ones in Pennsylvania and Ohio, there was a courting practice called bundling. A young man who was courting a girl would actually be permitted to spend the night in her bed with her, both of them fully clothed, sometimes with a bundling board placed between them. The whole idea was to let them talk privately through the night, get to know each other properly, without the expense and inconvenience of traveling home in the dark on dirt roads. The parents knew about it. It was considered acceptable within the community. I am not saying bundling was ideal. There were communities that moved away from it over time precisely because of what sometimes happened. But compare it to a society where a couple could not even be in the same room alone, and suddenly the Amish do not sound quite so strict. What all of this tells me is that every culture, every era, has its own version of rules about the most private parts of life. Growing up Amish, I sometimes felt like our world had more rules than anyone else's. But history has a way of humbling you. The Victorians were doing the absolute best they could with what they knew. They were not evil. They were not trying to make life miserable. They genuinely believed that cold air through an open window was saving their children's lives, that twin beds were progressive and healthy, and that keeping a woman ignorant was protecting her innocence. They were wrong about most of it, but they were sincere, and that is something worth thinking about. The rules we follow today, the things we are absolutely certain are correct about how we live and sleep and love, future generations might look back at them the same way we look back at Victorian window opening in January and say, they really believe that was helping? If this video made you see history a little differently, share it with someone who needs their mind opened just a bit today. And if you want more stories like this from someone who has lived between two very different worlds, make sure you subscribe. I will see you in the next one.